Welcome to another episode of the Down Under Stormtrooper. If you're a Ghostbuster, you know the struggle. You spent thousands of dollars on your hard-earned gear, your proton pack, your boots, everything else that goes along with being a Ghostbuster, and probably hauling it around in a box, or even worse, just putting it straight in the boot of your car. For me, I was lugging things around in an old beach trolley. It offered absolutely zero protection, it was really heavy, and it took way too much room in the car. Today we're fixing that. I found a heavy duty Tactix tub from Bunnings for about $100 Australian, and it fits all of my Ghostbusters gear. I'm going to show you how to transform this basic plastic box into a weathered in-universe containment unit that's stackable, secure, and looks like it's just rolled out of the back of the Ecto 1. The biggest challenge is the Tactix logo. I'm going to level out that indented emblem by using liquid UV resin. I use eSun from JCar, which goes for about $25 to $30 Australian. I'm going to use a small paintbrush to move the resin into the letters and also that circle around the edge of the emblem. I'm just making sure that I do little bits at a time, and then I cure it with the UV torch. It looked really solid until the cured resin failed to bond with the plastic and popped straight out. And that was an unexpected setback. So time for plan B. I use MTM Glass Fibre Polyester Putty from Super Cheap Auto, and it sells for around about $26 Australian. The putty uses glass fibres for structural strength to fill the indents while reinforcing the plastic. After cleaning the area with isopropyl alcohol, and that gets rid of any of the residue left over by the resin, I then prep the mix. I add about 2 to 3% of the hardener to the base, and then I blend it until the colour is uniform. If you see any streaks, it won't cure properly. After I applied the putty and while it was drying, I decided to mask off the lid because the next step is to put spray putty on, and I'm just trying to avoid the amount that I've got to sand, so I'm masking it off to avoid any overspray. Then I sanded back the filler, and I found there was a few low spots, so I decided to put a second coat on. Next I applied the spray putty, and I'm using one from Polycraft, and you can get it from Super Cheap Auto for around about $20. And it was a hot day, so I only had to wait about 5 minutes to be able to put the second coat on. Then I progressed to wet sanding. I started off with 400 grit and then moved on to 1200 grit. I wanted to give the tub a little bit of character, so I took to it with a hammer and just wanted to dent the edges and just put a little bit of lived-in look into the containment unit itself. I wanted to make it look like it'd been bashed around as getting in and out of the Ectomobile. Now I made sure I didn't go too rough with it because I didn't want to crack the plastic, and then that would make the whole thing unusable. And now for the metal layer, I'm using a can of Squirts Silver, and that's from White Knight, and you can get it from Bunnings for about $11. For some spray painting tips, make sure you shake the can for a good 2 minutes, especially with paints like these metal ones. They have small little flakes inside them, and you want to make sure that they're mixed really well. And then when you do start painting, make sure you start and stop off the tub. I like to begin with a light tack coat, and then you only have to wait a couple of minutes, and then you can apply your second coat. Make sure you use a 50% overlap technique. That helps to get good coverage. And also make sure you check the weather. You do not want to be spraying while it's really humid. And most importantly, make sure you let the paint cure for a good 24 hours. With the silver dry, it's time to do some masking with toothpaste. Now I'm using a standard toothpaste, nothing special at all there, and I'm also using a broken paddle pop stick, which just gives me a little bit of texture. And then I dab the toothpaste onto high traffic areas, so think corners and edges, and especially those hammered dents. I like to use a stippling motion to get irregular shapes, and make sure you let the toothpaste skin over for a couple of minutes before you do any painting on top of it. For the colour, I've chosen Rust-Oleum Gloss Apple Red, sells for about $18 Australian from Bunnings. And I've chosen that colour because it reminds me of the containment unit from the original Ghostbusters film. The red covers the toothpaste, but because the paste stays soft, it never allows the red to actually bond to the silver underneath. And so when we rub that off, it ends up looking like paint chips. While the red paint cures for a week, I'm shifting focus to the in-universe details. So I used ChatGPT to do some brainstorming for warning labels and serial codes. While the AI's visual output was a little bit chaotic, it did provide some fantastic ideas for shipping container weights, radiation warnings, and an unstable nuclear accelerator logo. I attempted to get ChatGPT to generate some STL files directly, but all of the files failed on me. And that left me with no option but to jump into Fusion 360 and create the stencils myself. By the way, let me know in the comments if you can guess what the serial code PSGB 19841115 stands for. For each label, I created a sketch and extruded it as a cutout through a simple plate. Now the no-ghost stencil was the most technical part. I designed a specialised reusable frame with 4 distinct inserts, white for the ghost, red for the no symbol, and 2 black paints for the fine details. I exported everything into Bamboo Studio and started the printing process. After a week of letting the red paint cure, it was time for the big reveal. The silver base layer peeks through perfectly, giving it a realistic paint chipping effect. I also selectively scuffed the red gloss in a few locations. I didn't want to do the whole tub because that would just dull everything too much, but I wanted to give a little bit of targeted textural variation. With the stencils printed, it was time to break out the airbrush. Now I have to admit, I'm still a bit of a learner when it comes to airbrushing, and these were my first custom stencils. I've had a lot of really bad experience with masking tape peeling off paint, even after it's cured for a good week or so. So I've decided to use rare earth magnets, and these are a cosplayer's best friend, so if you don't have any, make sure you grab some. And I used these to firmly fix the stencils onto the tub. Now I did get a bit of paint bleed with some of the labels. I think that's probably because I'm a bit of a noob when it comes to airbrushing. I might have gone a little bit too heavy, or potentially the stencils weren't affixed close enough to the actual tub. I was able to fix these pretty easily just by using a fine paintbrush, some of the apple red, and a hairdryer to speed up the time between coats. For the No Ghost logo, I used a specialised masking tape from Frontline Hobbies just to make sure it didn't peel off any of the red paint underneath. And I used the guiding pegs that I modelled into the frame just to make sure I secured the colour insert, and I started with the white ghost frame. And then I moved over to the black insert, and I have to admit I was a little bit hasty because when I removed the black insert, it peeled off some of the white paint underneath. So maybe learn from my experience and wait a little bit longer for that paint to dry before you change out the inserts. Airbrushing the stencils was easily the most tedious part of the process, so let's speed up the time lapse. And now for my favourite part of any project, and that's the weathering. So I mixed up some black and burnt umber into a wash to simulate years of workshop oil and field use. I chose this combo because the burnt umber adds a warmth and earthy tone that mimics aged grease much better than just using pure black. I use a paintbrush just to get the wash onto the tub, and then I use my trusty old weathering rag to dab the paint all over the tub. You can see I'm removing most of the wash as I go, and to help me do that, I'm making sure I keep that rag nice and wet. I want the wash to look like a stain and not a second paint job, so you'll also notice that I'm re-crumpling the rag to make sure I get different textures each time. Now I'm also making sure I'm catching any drips before they have a chance to dry, and ensuring the wash is only settled into the deep crevices. It did pain me to have to dirty down the No Ghost logo, but I couldn't leave it clean. Once the weathering paint had dried, I then applied 3 coats of semi-gloss clear. I found that the matte was way too dull and the full gloss was super shiny, and so semi-gloss was perfect to keep that used industrial balance. The final touch was to use some hot glue to line the interior with some EVA foam mats. They're really cheap, they're protective, and they're easy to replace. And as you can see, the tub fits the Haslab Proton Pack perfectly once the wand hose is disconnected, with plenty of room for my boots, PKE meter, belt, flight suit, and even the elbow pads. So no more clunky trolley, I'm ready for my next call. And there you have it, a basic $100 Bunnings tub transformed into a movie-inspired piece of Ghostbusters hardware. Not only does this look great when you're rolling into a convention, but it's a practical, stackable solution that's protecting your high-end gear during transport. If you want to try this project out for yourself, I'll put a full list of all the materials used down in the video description. And if you found this build helpful, make sure you like and subscribe for more prop building and costume tutorials. I'd love to hear what serial numbers and labels you put on your tub, so make sure you leave those in the comments below. Thanks for watching, good luck with your builds, and may those costuming gods be with you.